Ed Klekowski is a filmmaker, author, professor emeritus of biology, and adjunct professor of history at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. Now, he's written his novel of the First World War titled The Kaiser's American. Before we got into specifics about that story, I asked what led him to now author his first work of fiction.
You know, my wife and I had spent a lot of time basically researching this book right here, that deals with sort of the American presence in Belgium.
Americans in occupied Belgium
Yep.
right before the war, before
our participation in the war.
Yep.
And there were so many interesting characters, and in the memoirs of these characters, as you'd read them, they always kept mentioning meeting Americans in the German army as they moved around. And then I just sort of kept thinking, what is this? I've always heard of Americans volunteering for the French, Lafayette Escadrille, the Foreign Legion, but I never heard of Americans volunteering for the German army. And then there was lots of them, because if you picked up by the memoirs, because they kept meeting these guys, there was, someone from Springfield, someone from worked in a meat packing place in Chicago, someone was a waiter in New York. They just kept meeting them over and over, and I kept thinking, there's something here.
Let's go directly to your book. Your protagonist, young fellow named Paul Mayer. It's 1914. He lives in the United States, but he's of German ancestry. He's working in a family business. Gets in, we won't get into details, I don't want to ruin it for folks, but gets in some scrapes, and he decides, like all these other folks you're talking about, maybe it's a good idea to go home and fight for the fatherland. The United States not yet involved in this war.
That's right.
Directly, though we are supporting the opposite side to some extent.
We're supporting the Allies more than certainly Germany.
So pick up the story. I mean, it's an interesting young man makes an interesting choice.
Well, he, like I said, by pressure from his family, he essentially, as many of his generation, gets talked into essentially to go to Germany and fight. And in fact, there were so many people converging on New York Harbor that were German Americans during that period of time that there were riots on Broadway when all the German Americans marching along singing their songs would meet a bunch of Brits or French marching along, and everybody was boarding ships to get over to the fight. And so that there was quite an exodus of young men that volunteered for these various armies before we entered.
Let's put it in the proper historical context, because my first reaction when I just saw the title, The Kaiser's American, I thought, wow, what a disloyal thing to do. And yet again, I'm looking at it through 2016 eyes. We're talking 102 years ago. Yes. We're talking a very different time. We're talking a point when we were not involved in that war directly. Yet, in fact, President Wilson was saying, no way we're going to get involved in this war. So I suppose a young man like Paul Mayer, why not?
And there was lots of Paul Mayers. There was probably hundreds, if not thousands of them. Yeah, why not? I mean, the only thing they had going against them is, and the same with those who volunteered for the French or the British, if you signed up to take the oath of allegiance to another country in their armed forces, you lost your American citizenship. But they just took a chance, and they just did it. And like I said, there were just lots and lots of them. The British Navy had put ships out to try to block these liners coming from New York, heading for Germany, to take these guys off and put them in internment camps. So it was a lot going on, but it's a really forgotten aspect of the history of the First World War.
I often feel like World War I is kind of overlooked in a lot of ways by historians. Certainly nothing like the number of books or movies that we've seen of World War II. World War II, bigger, and comes just 22 years later, just completely overshadows it, doesn't it?
Of course, and also our participation overshadows it. You have to remember, in the First World War, we enter it in April of 1917. We really don't have any troops on the ground till the spring of 18. So our participation in it is maybe about 10 months. Whereas if you consider what the British, French, and Germans, their participation in it was, much gorier.
And well, yeah, and the recognition in those nations of the history of World War I, even today, is, I mean, thousands and thousands of people died in single battles. In the stories are just unbelievable.
Right, the carnage is that's just it.
Let's get back to your protagonist,
Yeah.
Paul Meyer. He gets there, and it's not what he expects. Let's put it that way, and you take it where you want.
Well, he's a young man. He doesn't know what he's getting into, and then he first winds up, just to give it a little bit of a way, he winds up on a Zeppelin crew, and the Zeppelins were sort of one of the first German secret weapons. You know, it was one of these things that looked really big in the sky, but probably had very little consequence militarily. But essentially, he's on one, and one of the first Zeppelin bombings that took place, and the facts in the book are all real, took place in the bombing of Antwerp, and he participates in that. So that's sort of, and in that, he starts getting a little bit jaded about what he got into.
War isn't the adventure he
No,
expected.
You can die.
As what happens to a lot of young people that go
Exactly.
off, especially in those times. He evolves. Again, I don't want to, it would be so easy to give away, but he evolves and ends up doing some other things.
Yes. He eventually winds up as a journalist, hiding that way. And what was interesting is that when I was writing the manuscript, I was getting a lot of books I was finding in used bookstores and things, old memoirs. And so I was thinking about, what newspaper could he be? I'm from Brooklyn. Could he be a journalist with? And one of the old books I bought had a folded up front page of the Brooklyn Eagle.
The great old Brooklyn Eagle.
The real Brooklyn Eagle.
Yeah.
And it was dated from the war. And I thought, this is telling me something.
There it is. Meant to be.
It's meant to be.
Meant to be. With great paper.
So I framed up the front page.
He ends up a sort of a zealot kind of character. He witnesses a lot of the great history events of that period, too, as well, as he travels and now he's run away from the United States. Now he's running away from the German army to some extent, too.
Yes. He winds up with sort of having a foot in each camp and really a foot in either camp. And so he's just sort of caught, and he survives. And again, reading memoirs from the time, there were such personalities. I mean, it was a time in America's history where, the Klondike's just finished. I mean, the Wild West is just coming to an end. So a lot of these personalities just drift over as when that war begins. A lot of them had been in Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders. There's all these really interesting people, and not only men, but a lot of women go over there that just really surprise you to start reading what they did and what they reported on.
It was really almost the last place to find some adventure.
At that time, yes. It was as if the Wild West had sort of moved to Belgium and France for some of these characters.
Well, again, the book is The Kaiser's American, the story of Paul Meyer. We thank you for coming in and spending some time with us. Always good to have you, sir.